files which you can just create it. Okay. So let's say if I wanted to add new file here. Okay. So this deployment file, this is the API version, kind, deployment, metadata, namespace, it is a default. If you wanted to specify anything, you can specify. And replica, how many number of replicas you wanted to create, you can do it. Selector, match labels app, right? Like this. So this EKS demo is nothing but that your app label. Okay. So you need to specify a particularly a match label here, and then you can also specify that particularly a spec here. So this spec is what we can say, in the spec you specify containers. In the containers you can specify, you need to specify name, what is the name of the particularly container. Image, this image I have already posted to my ECR registry. So this is the basic. So like this, and then you can say ports. So this port is nothing but the container port which I wanted to expose it here. Okay, like this. So this is the way you can create it. So idea is nothing but you need to have this selector match labels, you need to specify, because this particular label we will use it when we create a service, right? So we, when we create a service, we use that particularly label here, right? Selector app is equal to AKS, right? Here port is, I'm just saying that node port, and this port is, I can specify any node port, and this is a basically for forwarding the port here, correct? So we already know that particularly when we are creating a particular service, right? So there is a three types. One is for cluster, one is for node port if you wanted to access at the node level. Then if you wanted to particularly through a node, if you wanted to go ahead with the creating a sub load balancer, so you can use a load balancer service. So AWS has a load balancer service as well, right? So there is a three different type of, there is a network load balancer, application load balancer, and classic load balancer. So three different type of load balancer are there which is AWS provides, right? So it will create a load balancer service. Okay, so once we specify, so you can specify node port also. So through the node IP and node port we can access the application, but just we will create the node balancer. Okay, so this is the way you can just create it, correct? I have, I guess, already explained it to
Sir,
you. Sir. Yeah.
so the
So the
port
port
number,
number,
port and
port and
target port,
target
we
port,
want to
we
use
want to use
same port
same
number,
port
sir.
number as well. No, the target port, basically this target port is means on the container port, na. This port is nothing but that your service port. So an external will connect to a service on this port, but this service port will forward this particular request on which port? So this port, right, where the container is actually running. You see, the port of the service, the cluster members talks via this port, means any other external word people will use that. External traffic also then can use this.
Okay, so
Okay, so
then node
then
port,
node
sir.
port, sir. Node port is basically if you wanted to access through a any node IP, and then you can use it. So you can use the node port and the node IP. So if you have a node port type of service, then you can use like that. That in the external word traffic, you can use it for node port.
No, sir, we
No, sir, we
use that
use that
same
same
node port
node port
ID
ID
which you are
which you are
using,
using,
sir.
sir.
The
The three one four
3147.
seven.
Same thing
Same
we
thing we
use, sir.
use,
Or
sir. Or
we want
no,
to use.
any other port you can use it. Only the thing is that this port should not be reserved or should not be used by any other process. Okay,
So how to find that, sir?
you just use any random port.
But
If you
the node would start with three, like that, sir, or any?
no, not like this. You can start it. Earlier days, there was a concept of there was some reserved port till 0 to 7,000, which is used by the system and other things. But now this is not the scenario. Any port you can use it. 3141 581, whatever it is, 5 digits. So I guess 0 to 65,000, any port you can use it.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
So means try to use that any other port more than 10,000, any other port you can try and you can use it. Even this ports also you can use it, but our container is running 8086 because I created an image and exposed the port, the antenna on 8086 port, right? So if you are using and your container is running on 8080 port, you have to use the target port as a 8080. Okay. So this is the way you need this app selector. Means with the help of, so this service will connect to on these deployments where this particularly it will match that this is the label. App is a EKS demo. So in our deployment we have that particularly labels EKS demo. Okay. So this is the way you can try and you can just search for that. Okay. And you need to create that particularly YAML file in this format. Many such other things we can specify when we are talking about ports, when we are talking about volumes, persistent volume, security count. So many such objects, so many things we can specify, but this is a very basic which we are starting here. So you just need to create, and this is the way you can just do it. Okay, so still, I guess the cluster formation is under process, so we will wait for some time. So we will just see for some other, you can say, till the time this cluster is ready, then we can just go ahead and we can use that particularly. This particularly use simple commands kubectl create hyphen app file and then this deployment.yaml. Okay, so this image will be getting pulled from this your ECR registry, right? So we have already pushed it, so it will push it from as of now it is a public, so we don't face any problem, correct? So we kept it and make it as a public image, right? So anybody can use it and then you can process it. So these are the ways basically you can create a particularly a YAML file here. Another thing is that you can also create that particular deployment with the help of what we can say kubectl create deployment. That command you already know, right? So you don't need to be very much specify and that YAML file and do it, right? So kubectl create deployment hyphen hyphen image and you can specify the image name. That's the way also you can do the deployment. It's nothing required you have to create a YAML file. And if you wanted to expose that deployment, so you can say create service or you can just say expose deployment and give that ports and type. So that is also the way you can do it. So both the ways are okay, right? But to minimizing this particularly syntax error into YAML file, it is highly recommended you start with create that deployment with the from the command and then get that all these deployment details into YAML file and then you edit the YAML file. That is a little better way. Okay. So hyphen o YAML and you can take it into any other YAML file and then you edit the YAML file. Okay, so that is a little better way when we are talking about. So I'm just as of now I'm just not trying to just change it, but if you'll just see here, right? So you can see like this, right? If you'll see, so kubectl my deployment. This is the name of the deployment. Image. So this is the image, you can just take it. Right? So this will create a deployment. Right? So you can verify here kubectl get deployments. Right? kubectl get pods. Then you can kubectl expose deployment my deployment. Right? You can specify type is equal to whatever it is, let's say load balancer. Port, so you can take the port is, let's say 8086. Right? Target port, that is also you can take it, let's say 8086, something like that. So this is the way you can specify and you can run it. Right? So you have created, then you can say kubectl get svc, or you can say also kubectl get services. Right? So when you will say get services, it will display the IP and that endpoint and the port and everything through which you can access it. Okay. So still cloud formation is taking time, but this is the way basically you can create the deployment file and you can just do it. Okay. Simply, and using these commands you can specify and you can create the deployment here.
Sir, this
Sir, this
method is
method is
without
without
using
using
YAML file,
YAML
no,
file,
sir?
no, sir?
With
Yes,
only
correct.
using
Using
command.
command. No, no. So now if you wanted to get it into YAML file, so what you can say? kubectl get deployment my deployment, right? -o YAML. If you will write this command, it will display entire deployment in the form of file, in the form of YAML. But if you will say dip.yaml, so it will create a new file, it's a dip.yaml, and all the YAML the information in the form of YAML it will store into dip.yaml. So you can just say in the Unix vi dip.yaml, so you can see that particularly YAML file like this, and you can add it here. Correct? If you wanted to add it, so this is the better way. In the service also you can say kubectl get service, let's say my deployment, right? -o YAML. So you can also say services dot YAML. Correct? So you can say then vi services dot YAML. Right? So you can add it any details if you wanted to add, update or something like that into YAML file. So anything, let's say if you have creating a pods, so let's say you have that any pod here, so you can say kubectl get pod my pod -o YAML. So this is the way you can just take it into a pod.yaml, so that all pod details you can take it into this pod like this. So this is the way you can take it into a YAML file, then you can edit it. So it is little better, you don't need to prepare, because there is a syntax error unnecessarily if you will just face it to for syntax and size and all these things. So little better way, so don't try to create that YAML file, you just run through a command, get it, and then you just do it. Okay, so if you will see our particularly you see EKS cluster blanking cluster is ready. right? So I will see cd equal.
So we can use any method for that sprint to sir.
Any method.
Okay.
Sir, we can't see the screen, sir.
So 1 minute, I will show you. Right, so I'm just coming up here. You see, so if you will see here, basically I just moved into the directory where I have that deployment.file and this service.file here. So kubectl create -m deployment.yaml. Correct. So this is the way you can create it. So kubectl get deployments. Hello. You guys just be on mute here, please. kubectl. So you see, right, get pods. So number of pods. So if you wanted to do some debugging also for that, you can also say kubectl log on this particularly pod here. So we will see the log directly, right? So you see, first see the status of the pod. So that's the way you can understand that. You see, this is a Spring Boot particular app which is running, and this are the logs for that. Correct? So like this you can see. Correct? Then kubectl. And if you wanted to, this is a basically a go inside the container, then you can use exec. So use that particularly pod name, right? Then you can specify -it, right? Oh, sorry. Slash bin slash sh, right? So you can go inside that particularly terminal. So here if you wanted to check any logs or any other thing, so it is something, this is a basically we are moved into inside the container. So if you wanted to check something outside or any other thing, you see hello app.jar and everything, right? Now if you wanted to come, exit, come back, clear. So here you can just say basically a kubectl get services. So as of now we don't have any such services here, right? So one service, this is a default Kubernetes service. Now we will say kubectl get deployments. Correct. So I can say kubectl expose deployment also, but we have created a YAML file, so we will just use that kubectl create hyphen app service.yaml, right? This is a simple command which we use it. So you can use kubectl create, it will create it. If you have already created, if you wanted to do some changes, you can use the apply. You can also use a kubectl replace, means it will delete that and create new one. So kubectl create, apply, replace, these things, three commands you can try and use it. And there is a switch, something called as a hyphen force, if you wanted to execute something forcefully. Okay, so these are the ways you can use it for Kubernetes. So you see the services has been created. Now what we will say, kubectl get svc, so to check that the services are there. Correct. Now you see you got the endpoint. Now curl colon 8086, we have basically a particularly this API or that request mapping is like that demo all. Oh, we'll just wait for some time. Okay. Cluster
Sir,
IP. Yeah.
so we want to move that directly to that location, sir.
Directly where you have that deployment dot file, na. Okay. So basically we just need to six